Wow.
Apple sure did have an amazing 2022. Yeah, we did, Tim. That was a pretty good decoy year. We introduced the iPhone 14 Plus and the Apple Watch Ultra. Yeah, you know, one of those was pretty good. Plus, we introduced the new MacBook Pros and the M2 Mac Mini. That was fun. Yeah, we did. The what? Oh, come on, don't you remember the M2 Pro and the M2 Max chips? We dropped those at the end of 2022. It was great. Tim, were we supposed to do that at the October, website refresh or something? Are you trying to tell me right now that we didn't drop those last year? The ball just dropped. Oh, well, I hope that ball is made of ceramic shield, because we didn't actually ship any of those or announce them. Well, what the heck are we doing? Can we get started on this? Tim, we usually don't release stuff in January. The consumers aren't spending as much in January. I don't care. Get on it. We need to film a virtual event again and get this out as soon as possible. Sorry, please. I literally forgot to hit save on the webpage. There, it's done. We're all good now. They can complain about it. Finally. Let's begin. So yep, the rumors ended up being right on this one. Bizarrely enough, Apple dropped a 18-minute virtual event this morning announcing 2 new MacBook Pros with the fastest silicon ever, kinda, and the Mac Mini has never been more affordable or more expensive at the same time. It's a pretty wide range of Mac Minis to choose from. But let's talk about the new MacBook Pros primarily because that was rumored to drop all of last year. So yes, they virtually dropped the M2 Pro and M2 Max chips, and they seem to be pretty good in my opinion. They finally have accommodated for HDMI 2.1 on the new MacBook Pros, which means thank God you can actually get better than just 4K at 60 out of that port. Now, if you have a MacBook with HDMI 2.1, you can output up to 8K at 60 Hertz. This is a good sign in the case event of my dream scenario of having a Pro Display XDR with ProMotion and a 6K or 7K display or what have you. HDMI 2.1 probably should be able to handle that. And of course, the chips themselves are faster. So now they're configurable up to a 12-core CPU. And for the M2 Pro, it maxes out at 19 GPU cores. And M2 Max maxes out at 38 GPU cores. But there's binned options for the base models along the way. This is just a welcome refresh overall, considering there's no price hikes to be of note. And when I was playing around with the configurator, I even noticed that the 8TB storage configuration doesn't seem to be as crazy as expensive as it used to be. Still crazy, just less. And now you can max out the RAM to 96 gigabytes, which is kind of funny, but similar to the MacBook Air maxing out at 24 gigabytes of RAM. There's weird numbers, but hey, for people who want more RAM, there's more RAM. So I guess that means when we get the inevitable M2 Ultra, which is going to be 2 M2 Maxes stitched together, we'll be closing in on like 190 gigs of unified memory for the Mac Pro. But more importantly than all of that RAM and all of those GPU cores, Apple's saying that this results in about 20% faster CPU performance and up to 30% faster GPU performance. Emphasis on the up to. None of that really matters. All that matters is they color matched the MagSafe cables. You can plug in a MagSafe cable to the space gray MacBook, and the MagSafe cable is space gray. Thank God. That was definitely long overdue, but they also said to expect better battery life with these MacBook Pros. Not like massive jump, but like with the 16-inch model, they're saying it's 1 hour longer than before. I'd love to know how exactly they tested that, because depending on how you're using your MacBook Pro, your battery life can fluctuate a lot. But hey, the fact that they were able to test it, at least in some jurisdiction, and prove that it can last longer than my current MacBook Pro is absurd, because basically the last 16-inch MacBook Pro already had the best battery life in any laptop. This is going even further, and the 14-inch MacBook Pro battery life is up to 18 hours now, which is good as well. But yeah, aside from that, not too many changes to report here. The designs look identical, should have the same charging speed, same keyboard layout, sorry, touch bar fanatics, same webcam, same microphone, same speakers and all that. What I do find interesting though is I was very curious if these were going to be switching to 3 nanometer, and I was doubtful when they were rumored to launch this early in the year. It's bizarre for Apple to do hardware drops in January, but they've gotten rid of the vague graphs. You know how Apple used to always showcase, here's how fast the M1 is, here's how fast fast the M2 is. They've decided that those graphs, I guess, are just a little too vague and probably set false expectations, so they don't have that anywhere in the Go Inside M2 Pro or Go Inside M2 Max pages. So my theory, based on the wording that I'm looking at on Apple's website, is while yes, these chips do perform faster, they're probably pulling a bit more power, similar to the younger brother, the M2, and sure, probably because it's in the 14-inch and 16-inch MacBook Pros, the active cooling system can probably handle that higher clock speed and that higher wattage a bit better than the fanless M2 MacBook Air can, but my guess is that when you exceed that peak performance, you're probably getting worse battery life than you would normally get with the peak performance of the M1 Pro and M1 Max, but again, we'll have to wait until people actually have these things to test them to the previous generation. My guess is it's not like quite as good as Apple is making it out to be, similar to the launch of the M2 chip was. Let's talk about the most interesting Mac today, in my opinion. The MacBook Pros, not that cool, but the Mac Mini, they have finally killed off the Intel version. Whew, thank God. That leaves the Mac Pro as being crazy with absurd trade-in values as the only Intel Mac left in the lineup, but decent chance we could get the Apple Silicon Mac Pro maybe as soon as this March, but in my opinion, more likely at the Developers Conference in June. But they lowered the starting price. That was the biggest surprise for me today. I knew that it was due for an M2 chip upgrade, and I knew there was talk of them introducing the M2 Pro variant of the Mac Mini, but I just didn't see them dropping the price to $599, still with 256 gigs by default, which is pretty good. However, that base model, of course, is still rocking the normal M2 chip. I'm wondering if, okay, yeah, the price is lower, which is good, but is it because they switched to a single NAND instead of having two 128 gig NANDs? In case you're wondering what that means, it's like perhaps the base model Mac Mini, similar to the M2 MacBook Air, actually has worse read and write speeds than the M1 Mac Mini. So hey, if you're gonna go cheap on the NANDs in this case, I'm fine if you pass off that cost savings onto the consumer. The people who buy the base model Mac Mini are probably not gonna care that much about read and write speeds. It's just, hey, this is a fast, cheap Mac, which is nice, but the design seems pretty much unchanged, which is kind of a bummer for me. Like, I would have loved to have seen at least the SD card slot added to the front, but seems like the new Mac Mini looks identical from the front. But the more interesting category is, of course, the M2 Pro Mac Mini, which is straight up replacing that Intel Mac Mini that was on the website for far too long, which, yes, has 4 Thunderbolt ports on the back, and they've updated on that M2 Pro Mac Mini the HDMI port to HDMI 2.1, which supports 8K at 60 Hz or 4K at 240 Hz. Huge amount of video output capability through that port, which is great, but the price also went up a bit, actually like $1,300 for the base model M2 Pro Mac Mini, and as people have noticed, like once you start configuring that up to, okay, what if we want the non-binned M2 Pro and you want it to have 32 gigabytes of RAM instead of 16, well then now it's basically the same price as the Mac Studio. So could this be a little bit of Apple decoy effect going on? Because that was my main concern with the idea of bringing the M2 Pro chip to the Mac Mini. I was like, that sounds great, but I get the feeling that would start to eat into Mac Studio sales a little bit too much. Now that I saw them increase the price of this new Mac Mini, it's like, yeah, it very quickly, once you start speccing it up, turns into not that great a deal, because you know that the Mac Studio is going to have a better thermal envelope. It's going to have way more ports to choose from, 6 USB-C ports instead of just 4, and 2 of them are on the front. Plus the Mac Studio still gets the SD card slot, plus the Mac Studio ships with the base M1 Max variant, which still arguably has a better GPU than even the M2 Pro does, according to Apple's own graphs. So it's probably a toss-up in the use cases, but honestly, I could see a lot of people still opting for the Mac Studio, especially since it's been out long enough. You can find those on sale. You can find them discounted for like $1,800, maybe less. So yeah, it has M1 Max, which doesn't sound as cool or as new as M2 Pro, but if you don't care about having that extra RAM or needing a bunch of storage, the fact that there is a desktop Mac you can buy now for about $1,300 that's still gonna have 4 Thunderbolt ports on the back definitely sit in a much thinner package than the Mac Studio does. And I'm sure in terms of just raw CPU performance, the M2 Pro is pretty great. Yeah, that's gonna be a decent option for a lot of people in the lineup. But overall, I feel like this is weird. I'm not used to Apple having these kinds of virtual events in mid-January, but something's just telling me that because these are likely not on the 3nm architecture, and because they're not really diving into how much performance per watt they're really delivering. These are probably just 5nm chips that are overclocked a little bit with a little bit newer cores, but that means that they may be more thermally constrained than their M1 brothers, and that's likely why Apple is dropping them in January, is because they're like, well, we gotta get these things out there, we gotta get them done with. Similar to the connectivity upgrades across the board, like, yes, they now have Wi-Fi 6E, and they support Bluetooth 5.3. Some people are gonna appreciate that. I don't think that many will, but yes, the wireless speeds should be improved on these MacBooks. So thanks, Apple, for finally killing off that Intel Mac Mini. I feel like the Mac Mini lineup has never been more compelling than it is right now, and the 14-inch and 16-inch MacBook Pros, they were already great, and now they're just even greater than before. So when do you guys think Apple is gonna drop the Mac Pro with M2 Ultra? Do you think 190 gigabytes of RAM is not enough for those people hoping for 1.5 terabytes? All that good stuff. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below, and thank you to everybody supporting this channel on Tailosive Tech Pro. Seriously, helps us out a ton, as does just watching these videos, so thanks again. This is your Apple Shape here. I'll see you all in the next one.